the entire time I was there, I didn't meet a troll. I didn't meet anyone who was mean. Every single person that I met was lovely. They were lovely to each other. They were friendly to me. And yet the minute the microphone was on, they turned into these fire-breathing verbal warriors saying horrible things about what the left is trying to do to the country and what the Democrats are trying to do. There was a lot of lying, or at least I think it was lying, because I really don't think these people believe half the stuff that they say, especially having watched their behavior off the camera. A lot of political commentary, I am convinced, is a big show.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to this bonus episode of the Congressional Dish podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And in general, an episode like this, where I'm just telling you about my experience somewhere and the insights that I've gotten from that experience, this is the type of episode that I would generally only provide to producers of Congressional Dish, which means those are the people that are paying for this show and have access to my green room, either by paying for this show per episode on Patreon or by paying with any other method that we accept. And there's quite a few: paper checks, PayPals, Zells, Venmos, all kinds of things. But if you pay that way and then email either myself or my sister, Jen at congressionaldish.com or Lauren at congressionaldish.com, we can get you set up with our jerry-rigged feed for all of the bonus content. But for this particular episode, because this was a major historical event, I have decided to provide this episode to everyone and do it for free. So if you are listening to this show on Patreon, if you're someone who pays per episode, you are getting this episode for free. And keeping that in mind, and keeping in mind that on the ground coverage is expensive for the person providing it, it would be very helpful if you could provide some kind of payment for this episode if you get value from it. Like one of the one-time lump sum contribution type payments, either through PayPal or Zelle or Venmo, or sending in a paper check or a Chipotle gift card or whatever you want to send in to get some help with providing on-the-ground coverage if this is an episode you find valuable and you want me to continue doing in the future. Yeah, if you can help me pay for this trip, that would be very, very helpful. Today is going to be a different episode than what you're used to. This is not really gonna be about Congress, although kind of, sort of it is. But I am recording from a Airbnb in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, because I've spent the last 4 days at the Republican National Convention. And I originally hadn't planned on making this a Congressional Dish related trip. I'm actually here to do a live performance of my other podcast, We're Not Wrong, along with my co-hosts Justin Robert Young and Andrew Heaton, who are my roommates in this Airbnb. But when I actually got to the convention, I learned a lot about the political system and how the media works and who MAGA is and who Donald Trump is. And this was a historic event. And I think that I have some insights that might be valuable to you. And I also asked if you guys have any questions, and I got dozens of questions from you in just a couple of hours. So I think there's enough interest here that I'm going to tell you what my experience was like. So first of all, if you don't know, the Republican National Convention is where they nominated officially Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee for the 2024 election for president. This event began on a Monday, and 2 days before it, on the Saturday before the convention, there was an assassination attempt at a rally that had former President Donald Trump narrowly survive. I mean, had he not turned his head at the exact right moment, his head would have been blown off on national television. But instead, the bullet nicked his ear. I mean, we all know exactly what happened, but there was an assassination attempt. And then 2 days later was the beginning of this convention. And so I do think it would be a little bit weird if I didn't start with how that affected this event and my perception of it, because it was definitely a topic of conversation at this convention. But I think it did play a role in how things shook out. And so being at this convention and seeing these people in person, especially after an assassination attempt, just kind of made all of these characters of the Trump family into actual human beings. And I've always known, obviously, that they're human beings, but I was standing 10 feet away from a interview with Donald Trump Jr. And this isn't one that was on like a big television network. I actually can't even remember what network it was, but at the convention, they had a relatively small basketball stadium. And on the floor of that stadium is where they called it Media Row. And so it was booth after booth after booth of all different kinds of media outlets. So like Newsmax had a booth down there. The Young Turks had a booth down there. Breitbart had a booth. Matt Taibbi had a booth. So there were just a couple dozen different news outlets. And so one of them had a couch set up and Donald Trump Jr. was speaking there. So I stopped and listened to him, and I got to listen to a man talk about the fact that his father almost was killed 3 days prior. And that was a human being who was concerned about his dad. No matter what you think about politics or policy, that was a real thing that happened. And I also met someone who had been an attendee at that rally. So this guy, I actually met him on the floor of the convention right before Hulk Hogan came out waving an American flag on the last night of the convention. But I was on the floor and this guy was right next to the stage, and I ended up talking to him, and he pulled out his phone and showed me where he was when Trump was shot, because he had been filming as it happened. And so his video showed that he was right next to the stage. And so I said, thank God you're okay. And when I said that, he kind of teared up a little bit. And, I put my arm around him and I said, well, how are you doing with all this? And he said, I'm honestly not doing great. And I thought maybe I wouldn't come here, but, he's such a huge Trump supporter. He had gone to all the rallies, and he's like, and this is the moment that he's getting our party's nomination. So I just really wanted to be here. But after this convention, I'm going to have to go. And I think he said disappear into the woods for a couple of days. But he was clearly struggling with some PTSD, because here he was once again standing right next to a stage with a president, or the ex-president, or maybe future president, who knows, but where Donald Trump is going to be speaking. And it was a very similar vibe to a situation where just a few days ago, he could have died because there was a firefighter who was in the same crowd that he was that lost his life that day. So, I mean, you really feel it when you talk to these people and see how upset they were. And even when I saw Donald Trump, I saw him a few times. And one time I got relatively close. I'll say that I was, I don't know units of measure, but I was close enough to where, if you go on my Instagram, actually, I was posting a bunch of my experiences on my story, and you can see the pictures that I took with my own camera. I wasn't that far. And this was a human being. This was a guy who was standing with his family, had a bandage on his ear. And I'm not one of those conspiracy theorists that thinks it was all fake or any bullshit. I mean, he had an actual injury from something that had just happened. And it was definitely something that I felt when I was there. I definitely felt it. Another thing that I felt that a lot of people were asking me questions about is I felt safe. Not for 1 second have I felt unsafe in Milwaukee. And there was a enormous law enforcement presence here. So from the second that I got off the plane, you felt it, because between the gate and leaving the airport, and I was the first gate next to the exit, like we weren't in the airport for long, but I saw at least 4 security personnel with the big guns, which you don't usually see in an airport. So it's like from the minute you got off the plane, you felt it. And the way that they had done security here in Milwaukee is all the events were next to each other. So they had blocked off like multiple blocks of property in downtown Milwaukee. So there was the security perimeter started out a hotel, and then there was kind of a conference center, and then there was a basketball stadium, and then there was a bigger stadium. So the stadium that you were seeing, if you watched any of this on TV, was the really big stadium. But there was a smaller one next door where I guess some college basketball team plays. And so it was a big chunk of property. And then there was a couple blocks around all of that was all completely blocked off. And so to get into the perimeter, we had to show our credentials. And then they had actual TSA that brought in their metal detectors and their bag screenings. And so we went through, it wasn't the full TSA experience. Like no one had to take off their shoes. And I just had my water bottle and went through the baggage thing. But we did have to go through a TSA protocol, and it wasn't just TSA agents there. There were local police, there were Secret Service, and there were TSA at every single entrance. And all entrances were entrance only, and all exits were exit only. So I felt very secure there. And there was one day, I think it was Tuesday, but there was, rumor got out real fast that there was some kind of shooting. And I was getting a lot of text messages from members of the Congressional Dish community, from my loved ones, from people just being like, I heard there's a shooting, like, be careful, da, da, da. So just to make people feel better, we put something on social media just to let people know that we were already within the perimeter and we were fine. But even that shooting had absolutely nothing to do with the RNC. It turned out there was some kind of fight going on. I mean, I don't know the details because I quite frankly don't care. But there was some kind of fight that was going on. And with this really, really heavy police presence, someone that was involved in it had an interaction with a cop. So there was a shooting, but it was just one of those, classic American violence things that had nothing to do with the convention. And other than that, there was no violence whatsoever. There was also damn near no one protesting, which really surprised me because the security perimeter, it was large enough to make all of us feel safe within it, but it wasn't so large that, no protesters could get near it. There were a few protesters here and there. There were a lot of people that were, screaming things about Jesus. Those people came out in full force. But as for, political protesters, the very first day I was there, so this was Monday, there was a park that was near the security perimeter that had maybe a few hundred people there. That was really it. And even though I was in the perimeter most of the time, and so really wouldn't have known what was going on outside of it, on Wednesday night, we were waiting for an Uber and we asked the cops, these are the ones that were near the protest park, what have you guys seen? Have you been dealing with any protesters? And they said that they were really surprised that they really haven't seen any at all. And that matches my experience. I didn't see anything, which that surprised me a lot. I did think that there would be people, I know that the President Trump is not in office now, but I did think that there would be some people protesting. So yeah, it was remarkably quiet in that regard. So yeah, the assassination attempt played a role in the event, but we were told by Secret Service agents that they hadn't really changed any of the protocols that they were going with after the assassination attempt. Like they had already coordinated with local law enforcement and had local law enforcement from all over the country fly in for this event. So it's like they already had their staffing done. I mean, you have to keep in mind, the event started on Monday. The assassination attempt happened on a Saturday. And there was just so many overwhelming numbers of law enforcement officials that I really don't think that the assassination attempt played any role in how the security was done. And it was a topic of conversation in the event, but I was coming into this expecting a real victimhood vibe. Like I was expecting it to be a much bigger topic of the conversation. And maybe because he survived and the shooter was a registered Republican, like maybe that was one of the reasons that we didn't hear much about it. But it really wasn't an overwhelming thing. And one thing that I think you should know is completely overblown in the media is that I have seen on Twitter a lot of discussion about how the attendees were putting bandages on their ears at this convention. I can tell you I saw exactly one person with a bandage on their ear. And then my co-hosts Justin and Andrew also said that they saw very few. In fact, I don't even know if Justin saw any. So that was not a thing that was big at this convention. It was a few outliers here and there that was big time blown up in the media to be a bigger deal than it actually was. And when it comes to things being a different reality for me, as opposed to what I was seeing online about the event I was attending, that was one of the most eye-opening parts of this experience for me, was seeing the difference between what gets put out in the world by some of these media figures versus what actually goes on. So, what I learned is that we are, from a lot of these people, not hearing what they actually think. We don't know who they actually are, because a lot of these people are simply putting on a show. And, that phrase has been running over and over in my head the whole time I've been here, because you might remember my friend Matt, for a little while, it was a couple of years on and off, he worked for this podcast on Congressional Dish. And when we would watch hearings together, he kept saying, this is all like a big show. He just kept saying it's like a big show. And I didn't disagree with that. I didn't agree with it. I didn't really know, but it just kind of like stuck with me, a big show. But going to this event and spending as much time as I did at Media Row, I kept thinking of him saying this is a big show, because it's exactly what it seemed like. So let me give you an example. And I'm not going to name a name here because I really like this guy and I don't think that I need to put him on blast. So let me just explain Media Row to you and why I was there. So Media Row, like I said, was on the floor of the little basketball stadium. And it was booth after booth after booth. And so what was happening was members of Congress or whoever wanted to be interviewed, they would walk up and down the aisles in Media Row, and you would just be able to grab them for interviews. And so even though I didn't have a booth at Media Row, I was able to just go fishing for members of Congress. And so every day, except for Monday, because on Monday, I just didn't even know what I was doing there. I'll talk more about my personal experience. But yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I went to Media Row and was basically just loitering and fishing for congressmen. And so over the course of those 3 days, I was able to get interviews with 5 members of Congress. So I got to talk to Representative Hochin, Representative Cloud, Representative LaHood, Representative Van Dyne, and Representative Davidson. And the way that I was doing that is I was just standing around the hallway. And when I got an opportunity to talk to either them, or every single one of them had, whether it was a communication staff member or their chief of staff or someone, but each one of them had a member of their staff that was standing there with them and kind of coordinating all these interviews. But it was relatively easy for me to just walk up and be like, hi, and explain to them who I am and what I wanted to ask questions about. And I would stick a microphone on their lapel and we would just go and just interview right there in the middle of the hallway. And it took me a couple of days to really figure out that it was that easy, because even though I got 5 interviews, which was more than I was ever expecting to get, had I understood how this all worked, I think I could have gotten a lot more. So we'll see how it goes at the DNC now that I understand the whole game. But yeah, all you have to do to get the interviews is have the access to Media Row and stand there. And so that's what I did. I just kind of hung out. And where I was hanging out most of the time was in my personal safe space, which was at the Young Turks booth, because it's been a few years since I've been a commentator on the Young Turks, but back in, I'm going to say like 2017, 2018-ish. I don't know. I actually don't remember exactly when it was. But for a few years there, I was going on the Young Turks every once in a while. And so I went over to their booth where an old friend of mine from college was producing the show. So yeah, by the time I left, I was friends with everybody who was working for the Young Turks, except for Anna, which is kind of a bummer. She was the only girl that was there with the Young Turks. And we just, with the exception of just saying hi to each other, I never actually got to have a conversation with her. But I had a conversation with all the producers. John, who hosts the Damage Report, I talked to him a lot, which was really fun. We've been on the air together before, but it was really nice catching up with John. We got to chat quite a bit. I talked to Cenk for a while, Cenk Uygur, who's, the most famous of the Young Turks. And so they just made me feel very welcome as a kind of rando independent podcaster who felt very socially out of place there. They made me feel very comfortable. And so I just kind of made their area my home. And right across from their booth were a couple of couches. So at one point I wanted to charge my phone. So I plugged my phone into the wall and I sat down on the couch. And some guy comes over to me who I'd never met before, had nothing to do with the Young Turks, total stranger, and asked me if I would mind moving from the couch so that he can do an interview with someone. Now, obviously, this is Media Row. This is what we're here for. So I said, absolutely, no worries. And I got up and just, was standing there. And he went over to some other booth that he was unaffiliated with and asked them for a chair, brought it over to me, set it up. He was so nice. And I was sitting there kind of like making my notes and kind of like chit-chatting with him a little bit. And so he was just the nicest, kindest person. He was very polite, and I didn't think anything negative about him whatsoever. And then he turned on his camera to do the interview, and the conversation was just so mean. And it was mean in a way that it was talking about some kind of cartoon character, whatever they think the Democrats or the left are. It was pretty vicious. And then the camera goes off and he goes back to being absolutely lovely. And for the next 2 or 3 days, maybe 3 days total, I knew this person. I would see him and we would chat, and I met his daughter, and he helped me actually get a couple of interviews with members of Congress. And we had some very, very nice conversations, including some conversations where once I got more comfortable with him, I actually said to him, one of the things that I was really struggling with, witnessing what I was witnessing on Media Row, and I was specifically thinking of him when I said this, was that looking at how mean people think that they can be in politics, whether they're political commentators or in politics. This is how we are doing the job applications for what I'm paying attention to, which is the governing. And yet you're seeing the governing being dysfunctional because these people that are saying horrible things about each other and about the other party in politics, they don't turn that off when they get into governing. And where they're also still doing politics because they are getting reelected 2 years later. So the nastiness of the politics, it's infecting our government in a way that's actively hurting all of us. And he actually was really receptive to me saying that and didn't seem to get too upset about it. If I ever see him again, I think it would be great. Actually, like I said, I really like this person. And yet on the camera, he was a completely different dude. And so with that experience, I started, because it's kind of cool on Media Row, there's a lot of people just standing there doing nothing. So while like a member of Congress is being interviewed, their handlers are just standing there. When Rudy Giuliani, I spent entirely too much time within 10 feet of Rudy Giuliani because his booth was next to the Young Turks booth. But he was getting chased down by everyone from interviews, and he had 3 people that were kind of buzzing around Rudy and like helping him with his schedule. And so while Rudy Giuliani was talking to people, there was always a crowd standing there. So it was one of those situations that I think is very rare in life, that if you're just standing there next to a conversation that's happening, that's not considered weird. It is the best eavesdropping I've ever done in my entire life. And so that's what I started doing. It's just like when I wasn't with a member of Congress or didn't see any that I needed to stalk for interviews, I was just eavesdropping on everyone. And so what I started to do was just kind of pick out a few journalists, because I had heard a few while they were recording saying the kind of like mean shit that they were saying on air. And so I just started creeping around them to see what they were like off the air. Every single one of them was lovely human beings. Now, granted, most of the media there was from the same side of all of this, so maybe that played a role in it. But the entire time I was there, I didn't meet a troll. I didn't meet anyone who was mean. Every single person that I met was lovely. They were lovely to each other. They were friendly to me. And yet, the minute the microphone was on, they turned into these fire-breathing verbal warriors saying horrible things about what the left is trying to do to the country and what the Democrats are trying to do. There was a lot of lying, or at least I think it was lying, because I really don't think these people believe half the stuff that they say, especially having watched their behavior off the camera. A lot of political commentary, I am convinced, is a big show. And it was also interesting to me because some of you have asked, did I make any friends? And I feel like I did. So I did have a few friends that I brought with me. I had Justin and Andrew. Also, Brett Ehrlich is the person I was referring to when I said I have a friend for 25 years. You might know him because he's been on the Young Turks, a bunch of shows. I think he did the Happy Half Hour. He might still be doing that, but he's been on the Young Turks forever. He did Viral Video Film School before that. He did Rotten Tomatoes. He was the host of that for a long time. So he's been on TV for a good long time, and I was so excited to see him. I didn't know that he was going to be here. And so it was just really nice to have some existing friends there that every time I started feeling upset about the fake behavior of what I was witnessing, I had these 3 people that I could just go to. And even just standing there, I was like feeling better. And then that started to happen with a few people that I got to know better. So I already told you, John, and I'm resisting saying his last name because I don't know how to pronounce it. But John, let me look at my phone because we exchanged contact information. John Idarola. I'm probably saying that wrong, but we are now legit friends. And so, yeah, I had a good time with him. I got to meet Michael Tracy, which was really cool. And Michael Tracy was amazing to me because we'd only met once, and it was not in person. It was when I did the Useful Idiots podcast with Aaron Mate and Katie Halper. And Michael and I were the guests they had on because I was taking the self-coup attempt by Donald Trump much more seriously than Michael was. And so we had a debate about that on air. And so we had only met once on that podcast. It was kind of adversarial, although friendly. And so when I saw that he was there to work for Glenn Greenwald's. So he was doing all of the on-the-ground stuff for Glenn Greenwald's coverage. Michael was so nice to me. I told him that I was nervous about going up to members of Congress. I asked him how he does it, and he gave me some really good advice that boils down to don't think too much about it, just do it. And so I was able to kind of stand there and learn by watching how he was doing it. And his advice was great. He was just walking up to them saying, "Can I get an interview?" and was ready with all his equipment, did it right there on the spot. And so I just kind of did what he did, and it was super useful for me. And then at one point I just ran into him in the hallway, and he was going to go do a video, just kind of like a shoot, like an intro for their coverage. And so he invited me to come along and just see what he was doing. And so, yeah, I just learned a lot just by him welcoming me as a new friend and just observing how all of it was done. So yeah, that was great. So I did make some friends and some people that I'm hoping to see at the DNC. And it was striking to me how, like I said, I was going around Media Row and witnessing people turn into different people when the microphones were on them. But my friends were the same exact people off the air as they are on the air. So like John, Brett, Cenk Uygur, Michael Tracy, all of them are the same exact people when they don't have anyone recording them. And so I do think that that's worth knowing. Now, obviously, I'm biased to the Young Turks because they had welcomed me into their community before, but I haven't been on their show for years. And so I don't think that I have any kind of like incentive to bullshit you about them. Like they really were the same exact human beings. And watching their coverage of this, I was just really impressed because they had people that I know that Cenk and Anna do not agree with most of the stuff their guests were standing for. So it's like I saw them interviewing Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy. They interviewed Rudy Giuliani. They interviewed Charlie Kirk. They were very friendly interviews, and it was policy stuff. And then when they were just doing their commentary, they really did keep it to policy. They weren't being mean. And when I got to talk to Cenk off the air about his experience interviewing these people, because they did have a couple troll type people interact inappropriately, we'll say, with the Young Turks people. Nothing that they couldn't handle. It was fine. But I just wanted to see what their perception was of the event being very much team blue in the middle of this giant red carnival. They were saying that they were able to find common ground with all of these people. And I do know that Cenk is most interested in policy. And so he was even saying to me off the air stuff that I've heard him say on the air many times, which was that he doesn't care which party it comes from. If they can agree on a policy, like, let's go, like, let's get that done. And I genuinely think that they were looking for that. They were looking for opportunities for cooperation on policy where a lot of the other people that I was witnessing, specifically conservative talk radio people. That was not their goal. They were making money from division. I had a fascinating conversation with someone when I kind of said, in a way, I was asking, like, why are you so mean on the air? And the explanation was, it's really good for the YouTube algorithm. It's one of those things that as an outsider to this entire place, you kind of assume, but to have them say, like, yeah, when you say something hateful and you get the hateful comments, those comments lead to other commenters defending you, and it just becomes this big back and forth. And all those comments lead the YouTube algorithm to think that it has really good engagement, which makes the show get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they make more and more and more money. I never actually heard someone say that before, someone who was doing the hateful kind of coverage. And it was not just one person who kind of admitted that. So it was interesting getting the inside baseball. Like, I got it confirmed that declaring verbal war on the other side is very lucrative. And they will say that when asked. So really, really fascinating stuff. That said, so, conservative radio felt very toxic. It was toxic to be around. I was very disappointed in just the changing of personalities that happens when a microphone turns on. That is not the same as MAGA. Another insight that I got from being at the RNC is that I finally understand MAGA. And when I talk about MAGA, I'm talking about the actual human beings who are spending hundreds of hours over the course of their year doing unpaid work for the Republicans trying to get Donald Trump elected. That's who the delegates are. They are the most enthusiastic Republicans in the country who flew here from all over the country, who paid for the most expensive hotels in the universe. There's a reason that me and the boys are sharing an Airbnb outside of town because it was very expensive to be here. These people are putting in their time, their money, their effort into getting Donald Trump elected. These are the peak MAGA, and they are having the best time. And every single one of them was a good human being. You have this media portrayal of them in the cartoon version of the Republicans that is happening right now in the media. You would imagine that these are racist, boot-stepping, authoritarian-loving people trying to end democracy, like all that bullshit. That's not what I experienced here. I experienced a lot of people who own businesses, small businesses in particular. I spoke to a lot of people who are very smart and intelligent. These were people that were very excited to talk about policy, and you could see whether I agreed with their ideas for solving the problems that they were talking about. Every problem that they were talking about was a real thing. So we weren't existing on a different plane of reality. I actually sat down and had lunch. I talked to a lot of delegates because they were just nice. But I sat down and had lunch with a delegate from Florida. Her name was Michelle. And I was very impressed with her. Tax policy was really important to her. I mean, these were people that, for the ones that were there for policy reasons, they were smart. And I felt like if I was in Congress with Michelle, we could have found a way on, all right, let's take a piece of paper. Let's find the things that we agree on. Like, let's go. Where I did find hope in being at this conference, and genuinely for about 2 days was feeling a weight off my shoulders. I was feeling some relief because being in the middle of MAGA world, it's nothing like I've experienced online. Online, when I see MAGA, I kind of have to brace myself because they're mean. The online warriors, they're the ones that have been rating my show 1 star. Those are the people that send the meanest emails. They say the meanest things. I have had a very bad experience with MAGA online that was the exact opposite. When I was in their house wearing a journalist, like all the journalists had bright yellow lanyards around our necks that we couldn't take off. So it was very clear that I was a journalist. Everyone was so kind to me. There was no fake news, like any of that stuff. And even when the speakers would say something about the news, people would turn to me and smile. It wasn't vicious at all. And now I kind of feel like I understand what MAGA is because they have a community, and it is a fun community. These people were partying, and it was just a love fest. People that didn't know each other were, hey, we're going to lunch, and there were groups of them in all the restaurants and at the tables outside, and there were dance parties, and on the floor of the actual convention, you'll see all the people sitting with their states, and it's packed with human beings, right? Well, during the commercial breaks, there's a band, and it was a good band. It was a boomer band. So they were playing all the boomer jams. They were the perfect set list for this crowd. And the dance party there was fantastic. So for the media, the way it worked for me is that I had to go and give up my pass to get onto the floor, and you could only get onto the floor in 30-minute increments. And I really had no reason to be down there journalistically, so I only did it for 30 minutes on Thursday night. I was down there when Hulk Hogan got onto the stage. So I was actually down there for a pretty amazing moment, because I was down there for 3 songs of Boomer Jams. So I did join the old lady mosh pit in front of the band and dance with them for a little bit, because it was just so much fun. And then Donald Trump came out with the family. So that's when they all went and sat down. I was right there on the floor filming it. And then I turned around and witnessed Hulk Hogan come out on the stage, and I was standing next to the stage. Like, I was touching the stage when he came out. So if you look at my Instagram story, which I've saved as a permanent highlight, so you can watch it anytime, but go to my Instagram at Jen Briney, and you'll see how close I was to Hulk Hogan. The whole thing was just, it was ridiculous. But being down there on the floor was such a useful experience, because that's when I was able to look around and see them all together and notice what they all had in common. And what they all had in common is that they were all wearing something that signified that they were on Team Trump. So some of the women had Trump's name in diamonds on their lapels, lots of Trump hats. There were people that were wearing Trump masks. I have that in the Instagram story. But everybody had this signifier that, like, I'm Team MAGA. Some people had dresses that were, you could wear these things to the Academy Awards. I mean, they had Trump paraphernalia on them. It was wild. And so what I likened it to was like a Jimmy Buffett concert, because I am a parent head. I've been to 15 Jimmy Buffett concerts, but I am perfectly aware that Jimmy Buffett, God bless his soul, rest in peace, he's not some great singer. You know, he wasn't some musical talent like an Adele or Amy Winehouse or a Celine Dion. Like, there's some people that are just musically blessed. That's not Jimmy Buffett. But what Jimmy Buffett did is he created a community that was really fun to be around. So when I went to the Jimmy Buffett concerts, yeah, the concerts were fine, but it was the parking lot party that I loved. And what I now know about MAGA is that these people are throwing a party, and it is a fun party. I kind of love MAGA. That's what happened to me at the RNC, because I get it now. It was a very fun club of very nice people who were just having a good time. And it explains to me how they can forgive whatever Donald Trump does, and they can defend whatever Donald Trump does, because this isn't for them really about governing, unfortunately. That kind of takes a back seat to the group that you can get into, no matter who you are, no matter what race you are, because it wasn't just white people. There was a lot of white people, but it wasn't just white people. There was a decent number of black people. There were Mexican people. I do think that there will be, a different representation at the DNC. But the point is, as long as you had some kind of signifier that said Trump on your body, you were in the club. You automatically had friends, and you were going to have a good time. So now I get it. And so that's why, it doesn't matter what Trump says or does. These people are going to love him because they are in the club. A lot of people call it a cult. And for a minute I was like, is that what this is? But I really don't think so. I think Donald Trump did a good job of creating this community, but it didn't necessarily have to be him. But I think that the community, tied with the fact that these people, because it is politics, they get to have this virtue in their actions. They're out there saving the world while they party. So for the people that were there, like they were very proud to be there because they felt like they were doing some kind of good for the country. I was really in love with the MAGA delegates and everybody was. Now, had they not been as excited as they were, maybe if there was, some kind of contention there, maybe it would have been different. But these were just the happiest people I've ever seen in my life. It was a giant Trump carnival. Any split you might have in the party wasn't visible there. Someone on one of the social media sites asked me, what about the old guard? How was their reactions to all of this? The old guard wasn't there. They physically weren't there. We have a living Republican president, George W. Bush, wasn't there. No member of his family was there. Dick Cheney, still alive. Vice president from the Republican Party, not there. Mitt Romney, their former nominee, not there. Paul Ryan, not there. So many of the people that were the Republicans of the past weren't there. This is now the party of Trump. And the MAGA people, this was their celebration. They were so happy and it was infectious. So Monday when I got there, I was so nervous about being there. It was very socially awkward. By Wednesday night, I was having a legitimately great time. And that happiness kind of carried into Thursday. And it wasn't really until Trump opened his mouth that I kind of got brought down to reality. So Trump was there for all 4 days, which is not normal, by the way. Usually there's 4 days in these conventions and the president speaks or the presidential nominee speaks on the last day. And you really don't see him before that. But not Donald Trump. He wanted to be in the room sitting there every night so he could hear everyone singing his praises in person. Because that's another thing too. This convention, and I was hanging out in the C-SPAN suite with people who have been to every convention since the 70s. And they were noting how the speeches and just the convention in general was kind of devoid of policy. When they did talk about policy, there were two things that I noted that were definitely the top two topics of conversation. One was immigration. There was the demonization of immigration and immigrants and promising to deport them all. And I found it very distasteful, but that was the number one theme in most of what I heard policy-wise. And then there was a lot of discussion about stopping people under the age of 18 who want to transition their gender, their sex, prohibiting them from doing so. I don't understand why in a country that has so few trans people in it, this is such a big focus for the Republican Party. I found it very mean. But those were the big two policy themes. That's what I saw over and over again, which is kind of fascinating. It was fascinating because abortion was hardly mentioned at all. Like they got the Supreme Court to basically kill our right to abortion in all the red states. They didn't mention it as an accomplishment. They didn't outline any plans for what they plan to do about it going forward. It was hardly mentioned. So yeah, this wasn't big on policy. It was Trump, Trump, Trump. Trump's a good man. Trump's an innocent man. It was just all about him. And he was there every day, but he didn't speak. So for most of the days, I was just interacting with MAGA and feeling better and better about like, okay, these people are not monsters. Their concerns about even immigration, they didn't feel racist to me in any of my conversations, even though it came up every single time. It was more safety. They were afraid of terrorists getting in. They were afraid of criminals coming in from other countries because they are definitely being told by the party leaders that that is what is going on. There was even some of that in Trump's speech.
On the wall, we were dealing with a very difficult Congress. And I said, oh, that's okay. We won't go to Congress. I call it an invasion. We gave our military almost $800 billion. I said, I'm going to take a little of that money because this is an invasion. And we built, most of the wall is already built. And we built it through using the funds because what's better than that? We have to stop the invasion into our country that's killing hundreds of thousands of people a year. We're not going to let that happen. In Venezuela, Caracas, high crime, high crime. Caracas, Venezuela, really a dangerous place, but not anymore. Because in Venezuela, crime is down 72%. In fact, if they would ever win this election, I hate to even say that, we will have our next Republican convention in Venezuela because it will be safe. Our cities will be so unsafe we won't be able. We will not be able to have it there. In El Salvador, murders are down by 70%. Why are they down? Now, he would have you convinced that because he's trained murderers to be wonderful people. No. They're down because they're sending their murderers to the United States of America. This is going to be very bad. They're coming from prisons. They're coming from jails. They're coming from mental institutions and insane asylums. The press is always on me because I say this. Has anyone seen Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter. He'd love to have you for dinner. That's insane asylums. They're emptying out their insane asylums. And terrorists are coming in at numbers that we've never seen before. Bad things are going to happen.
In my experience, I didn't feel it as a racist thing, but you can think whatever you want to about it. But then Trump opened his mouth. And when it came to Trump's speech, I was extremely lucky to be in the C-SPAN booth because of not only because I got to hang out with all the C-SPAN people, which was awesome, but it was interesting being in the C-SPAN booth because of where it was situated. We were on the far side of the stadium. And so when I was looking straight forward out into the arena, all the speakers were on the left. And on the right was their teleprompter. The teleprompter wasn't right in front of their face. They had a big screen that was on the back of the stadium. And so that's what Trump was reading off of. He was looking out over the crowd to this screen and reading his speech. And there was a lot of press reports saying that Trump had rewritten his speech after the assassination attempt. He wanted to be unifying the country and telling people that he wasn't just going to be a Republican president. Like, he wanted to take all references to Biden out of the speech. And we were preparing ourselves for a kinder, more gentler version of Donald Trump. Like, there was, reporting that he was very subdued and thinking a lot, and it seemed a changed man after the assassination attempt. And so we were all kind of curious, like, what are we going to see here? Well, because of my unique vantage point, and the fact that I am extremely farsighted and had my glasses on, I was actually able to read Trump's speech while he was speaking. And most people in the booth couldn't do that because the type was too small. I think I was the only one who was able to really read every word of it, because I was sitting next to someone, and when Trump would go off prompter, he would say, "Oh, look at that, like the prompter's frozen again." And I kept telling him, like, no, it's not frozen. Trump is going off the rails. And so they would pause his speech until he comes back to it. And then he would read. And then when he went off the rails, they would pause it until he came back. And so I got to really see what was in the speech and what was off prompter. And a lot of that long, rambling, boring speech was off prompter. And so right when he started doing it, and I realized that I could tell the difference between what were the pre-prepared thoughts and what does he really think? Like, what are the words that are just falling out of his face? I started taking notes in my little notebook. I ended up with 7 pages of notes, which was more than I was ever expecting to take. Although it did help me combat the boredom to have something to do. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to drop in for you so that you can understand some of the stuff that I know because I was reading his speech in real time. What was Trump? What he actually thinks. Like, this was the stuff that was not planned, just came out of his face hole while he was up there. And this was the stuff that made me kind of depressed after the speech.
Don last night was incredible. They went through so much trouble. They got subpoenaed more than any people probably in the history of the United States. Every week they get another subpoena from the Democrats, crazy Nancy Pelosi, the whole thing, just boom, boom, boom. They've got to stop that because they're destroying our country. This administration can't come close to solving the problems. We're dealing with very tough, very fierce people. They're fierce people. And we don't have fierce people. We have people that are a lot less than fierce, except when it comes to cheating on elections and a couple of other things. Then they're fierce. Then they're fierce. And then we had that horrible, horrible result that we'll never let happen again. The election result, we're never going to let that happen again. They used COVID to cheat. We're never going to let it happen again. The damage that this administration has done, and I say it often, if you took the 10 worst presidents in the history of the United States, think of it, the 10 worst, added them up, they will not have done the damage that Biden has done. I'm only going to use the term once. Biden. I'm not going to use the name anymore, just one time. The damage that he's done to this country is unthinkable. It's unthinkable. I'm going to protect Social Security and Medicare. Democrats are going to destroy Social Security and Medicare because all of these people, by the millions they're coming in, they're going to be on Social Security and Medicare and other things, and you're not able to afford it. They are destroying your Social Security and your Medicare. We have a great military. Our military is not woke. It's just some of the fools on top that are woke.
So when I read his speech, that is not what it sounded like. If he had just stuck to the speech, it was a pretty good unifying speech. There wasn't a lot of trash talk in it. There was a few lies, some stats that I'm almost positive were made up, but it wasn't a mean speech. All of the mean stuff, that was stuff that he did on the fly. And so all of the comfort that I had gotten from being surrounded by MAGA and finding them lovely and finding them not to be terrible human beings, the man that they have created this amazing community around is the same old Trump. I don't think he's learned anything. I don't think he is trying to unite us. I don't think he's trying to be a dictator. There was no signs of that whatsoever. So, I do think that there's a lot of rhetoric on the anti-Trump side that is also insane. But when it comes to the stuff that he would do as president, I still think that he's winging it. I think he would be winging the presidency just like he did the first time. I think he'd be winging the presidency the way he winged this speech. I don't think there's a lot of plans there other than Trump 2024. I think winning is the goal. And after that, they'll just see what happens. So yeah, I actually left the RNC kind of back to where I started emotionally, where I was like, okay, this is kind of depressing. I really don't want this guy to be president, even though his followers, I'm no longer afraid of that movement at all, because I get it. They're having the best time of their lives. That's what it was like to be at the convention. And then just for those of you who give a crap about me as a person, as a journalist that you've supported for all these years and have helped me get to this place. I mean, I do want to thank you if you've been supporting this show, for supporting this show, because this was an amazing experience for me, even though it was a emotional roller coaster just on a lot of different levels. I got these credentials because I've been in this game now for 12 years. And so even though I walked in there as a total outsider, I didn't know anyone. I had imposter syndrome so badly. I had massive social anxiety. And as many of you know, I quit drinking a year and a half ago. So my usual social lubricant, I didn't have that. I had to go in with no lube. And it was uncomfortable. So yeah, socially, I really struggled with this one, but I got to be there for a historic event. There was an assassination attempt followed by a convention, which this convention was just kind of the coronation of the complete transformation of the Republican Party. It was a fascinating thing to be there for. I learned so much about how some media outlets are operating, the ones that are vicious in particular. I learned a ton. I think it's going to really help me in analyzing what I'm witnessing, even when I go back to not being in person. And just the fact that I got to meet and become friends with some of the journalists that I respect. I didn't really get to sit down with them at all, but I did get to meet Matt Taibbi, which was
amazing. And hopefully I'll get to talk to him some more at the DNC. But to be in the room with these people as equals, I never could have done this without you. And so I'm so incredibly grateful to the Congressional Dish community for helping me get to this place in my career. It was absolutely amazing. The other thing that was absolutely amazing is being up in the C-SPAN booth. I feel like such a douche even saying this, but it seemed true. I'm a bit of a C-SPAN celebrity because the episode that I recorded, I want to say it was at the end of 2022. It was the interview with Howard Mortman, who's the communications director and also one of the nicest human beings who has ever walked the face of the planet. I absolutely adore Howard. But the people at C-SPAN were fascinated with the questions that I apparently was asking Howard, and they shared it widely within C-SPAN. And so what was amazing to me is that C-SPAN has just hired a new CEO. And before I ever met him, I was talking to some of the other executives and just asking, like, you know, does this new CEO, because they've had the same CEO for a while at C-SPAN, I'm like, is this someone who's on board with the vision? Or is this some, you know, cable news guy that's going to come in and ruin C-SPAN? Because that would be the worst thing ever. And they said, like, no, their main qualification when they were picking a CEO is to find someone who loves C-SPAN for what it is. And so apparently the new CEO is a super fan of C-SPAN. And then when I met him, I absolutely believe it. He was an absolute doll. But when I met him and I put my hand out and I said, hi, I'm Jen Briney, his eyes lit up and he said, oh, Jen Briney. Like, he recognized my name. And so, yeah, it was such a trip to be up there and like invited into the suite, but not like, oh yeah, come in, rando loser, as like a favor. Like, they were happy to have me there. And that was such a amazing experience. I also got a new C-SPAN hat that I love. C-SPAN has the best swag. It was such a pleasure and made me feel like a real journalist for the first time in my entire life. And so even though I was so nervous to come here, I'm also really excited for the DNC because that one is shaping up to be a real shit show. Because the RNC, this was a coronation of Trump. This was the Trump carnival. There was no question who the nominee was going to be. As of this recording, we have no real idea who the nominee is going to be at the DNC. And there is a chance it might be an open convention, which means that they're picking the nominee at the actual convention, which is not something that has ever even been contemplated in my lifetime. So yeah, that event is right around the corner. It's only a month away and I'm really excited for that one. And I'm also really excited to walk in there with a plan because, like I said before, I had 5 interviews with Republican congressmen. And eventually on Patreon, I'm just going to give you the full interviews. But what I was doing in those interviews is I was talking to them about the institution itself, asking them, do you think it's dysfunctional? How can you fix it? And got some really interesting answers, but none of the interviews on themselves was all that fascinating. What's fascinating was the different perceptions from people in the same party as to how it's functioning and their ideas for how to fixing it. And so what I want to do is ask the same questions to the Democrats and then give you an episode with the most interesting comparisons. And so I'm going to walk into the DNC with a plan for that episode. I'm excited for that event in a way that I wasn't excited for this one. For this event, I was nothing but nervous. And then another really crazy thing happened to me, which those of you who follow me on Instagram are already aware of. But I was the co-anchor on Sky News Arabia for the coverage of J.D. Vance's acceptance speech on Wednesday night. And it's, you think that these huge news outlets have a plan, right? But what I've realized as someone who's felt like an imposter forever because I'm just kind of winging my career is that most journalists are winging it, because the way that I ended up on Sky News Arabia was that as I was mulling around doing nothing in Media Row while fishing for congressmen, I started chit-chatting with a nice guy named Matt who was standing next to me. I was watching a congressman speak, waiting to be the next in line to ask them to talk to me, started shooting the shit. He told me he worked for Sky News and said, would you like to come on sometime if we need some congressional analysis? I said, I'd love to. Here's my phone number. And then he texted me and said, would you give some commentary after JD's speech? And I said, of course, I'd love to. And then he texted me again. He said, you know what? We'd actually like some more of your time. Would you be willing to do kind of a bigger segment here and be our main guest? And I said, of course, I would love to. And that's how I found myself up on the balcony, which, by the way, all of these different amazing setups that you see, where you've got the Jake Tappers of the world with the microphone and the big lights and all that and these amazing backdrops. The Sky News Arabia guys, they just grabbed some chairs from inside, brought it out on the balcony, turned on the light, and like, that's our amazing set. That was everyone's set. It was like, what furniture can you steal from the inside and drag to the outside and make it look okay? There's nothing all that pre-planned for so many people in journalism, which was so nice for me to see. It was also like when Michael Tracy was doing his intro outside, he wasn't there with some like giant camera, you know, some cameraman with a big thing on his shoulder. Like, that was impossible for me to do with my small show and my small budget. Like, they recorded all of it on an iPhone, sent it via WhatsApp to Glenn Greenwald. And they had a tripod that I'm sure folds down to the size of maybe an umbrella, if that. And so I just felt like, okay, like, now that I see how the pros do it, I think I am a pro. And that was really, really cool. And then when it came to Sky News Arabia, so here's some fun facts. I had to have a translator in my ear in order to get the questions, because they're producing it out of Abu Dhabi for an audience that doesn't speak English. But what's hilarious is the co-host speaks perfect English. So we were chit-chatting for a while before we went on the air. He speaks perfect English, but on the air, we had translators. And so I would speak, and then he would sit there and pause for a while, pretending that he had no idea what I said, when I know damn well he understood every single word. So half of the translation was bullshit. But for him, he was speaking in Arabic. And so I did have to have a translator. And I knew that the first question was going to be something along the lines of my reaction to the speech. But the translator's accent was really thick and I wasn't used to it. So it's like the first time I heard his voice, we were already on the air. And so the first question, I had no idea what the question was. I fully guessed. And what I did miss in the first question is that they were setting me up to kind of talk about how the Republicans are trying to transition into being the party of the working man. I completely missed that because I didn't get the translation. So I gave my reaction to the first question. And then eventually in the middle of the recording, I just had to say, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the translation, and have him say it again. And after that happened, he started speaking a lot slower. And by the second half of it, I got it and it went great. And then they asked me if I would come on again. So I think I did okay. I don't think I completely whiffed it. But that was a real trip to have a translator in my ear when doing something on camera that was being broadcast all over the world. That was a really weird, exciting experience. And that was probably my favorite part of the whole conference. And then let's see, I want to cover all of the questions I can answer. I know a lot of people asked questions about the speeches and like my perception of that and the policies that they talked about. But to be honest with you, I really wasn't watching the speeches very much. I would say that I was in the main arena listening to speeches for a total of maybe 30 minutes spread out over the first 3 days. Because even when I listened to J.D. Vance's speech, I was listening to that in the earpiece as I was on the set for Sky News Arabia. So I really wasn't in there listening to speeches. I really didn't find a lot of value in that, because during the speeches, being on Media Row, I was still able to find members of Congress. I was still networking with other journalists. And more importantly, I was still eavesdropping on people as they were on the air covering the speeches. And so I was able to kind of, just get a vibe on how they're doing their jobs. I also had the pleasure of meeting a icon in journalism. Her name's Rita Crosby. She was the first woman to work for Fox News, and she has interviewed dozens of world leaders. She's interviewed the Pope. Everybody loved Rita. Just watching her walk around Media Row, and I did run into her in the stadium, like she's hugging every single person that she sees. And she was a real treat, because she also had a different persona on air than she did off the air. I never heard her say anything vicious. She wasn't one of those people, but it was just like she had camera personality and then she had off the camera personality. And I got to stand for perhaps about a half an hour with my friends. She was talking to Justin, Andrew, Brett, and myself. And we were talking to her and her husband. And so and there was nobody in Media Row. It was just us. It was after everything ended on Wednesday night. And so getting to talk to this icon and just ask her some questions about the interviews she's done. And that was a real treat. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I didn't spend a lot of time in the speeches, because I think my time was better spent forming some relationships that I think will help me do Congressional Dish in the future. So yeah, I can't answer those questions because I wasn't watching the speeches. But before I end this, the last questions I will answer are kind of fun ones. So someone did ask me about the food and drink situation at the RNC. And I had a lot of questions about this too. I went in there going like, I don't know if I'm going to eat. Will they be selling food? Is it free? Like, how does this work? So I had a bag full of granola bars. But like I said, there were stadiums there. And so in the actual event itself, the basketball stadium where Media Row was, the concession stand was open. So I could get popcorn or a hot dog or like a bottle of water. It was right there. And they were selling it, typical sports stadium prices. I paid $5 for a bottle of water that I ended up just refilling from the drinking fountain over and over again. And so they had that kind of stuff. But then they also had, in between that stadium and the conference center, they had 2 rows that went the entire length of the stadium of vendors. Tuesday morning, I had fried cheese curds for breakfast because when in Wisconsin, that's what we do. I got that from one of the vendors. There was a vendor that was selling little pies. There was a vendor that was making burgers with cheese curds on them. There were vendors selling, I think one of them was selling soap. So it was like when I say it was a Trump carnival, I am not kidding. It felt like a sporting event, but it wasn't. It was a Trump worship event. Although I hate to use the word worship because Trump isn't what they were worshiping. That's why I don't want to call it a cult, because it wasn't Trump that they were there for. I really don't think. I think they were there for each other. And Trump was just kind of the thing that brought them together. But I did notice that there were heavy religious overtones in this conference. There was both in like the Jesus variety, and then there was a lot of Jewish people as well. And one of the things that I know from having been raised religious is that believing things with no evidence is seen as a virtue. And there was a lot of that going on. So I did get a question like, someone asked me, did I get any sense on why they think the 2020 election was stolen? Yeah, I did. It's because Trump said so. And why do they think that Trump is innocent? Because he said so. These are people that have a predisposition to believing things without evidence because they believe whatever their religion tells them without evidence. And I know there's a lot of religious people in this audience, and I'm sorry if that's offensive, but that is something that I witnessed at the RNC. You have a lot of people willing to believe things without evidence who do that in other parts of their life. And so going through Media Row, there was a lot of religious talk. Even in Trump's speech, he was talking about God saving his life and a lot of religious overtones in the RNC. I noticed that for sure. But it wasn't a cult. It was a carnival. This was a party. A pretty damn good one at that, I got to say. And then the last question that I got was about merch sales. Because at the Trump carnival, you would expect it. But really, aside from there was a merch area, it was the size of a street corner, because that's all it was. It was a street corner between the convention center, the Baird Center, if you're from Milwaukee, the Baird Center, and the basketball stadium. There was one corner where they were selling merch. And outside of that, I really didn't see much being sold at all. There was a lot of stuff just like C-SPAN was giving out stuff for free. And so there were little places where you could just pick up like knickknacks and things. And of course, in Media Row, everyone had a booth. And so I have Jesus mints in my purse right now because some religious radio station was giving out mints. And, I grabbed some mints and they said, God bless you. And I said, God bless you back. And like walked away. They were so nice. So there's stuff like that, but it wasn't like the tacky merch thing that you would expect, because again, these were delegates. So unless you were a delegate or a journalist, you couldn't get into this. So it wasn't just random people off the street. And even outside of the perimeter, Milwaukee felt kind of dead. If you weren't in the perimeter, it felt a bit like a war zone. there were cops everywhere, Secret Service everywhere. They had shut down on the roads. Like, I think Milwaukee in general, the people that live here were just like avoiding the whole situation. So there was no one there to sell to. So the merch situation really wasn't the tacky swap meet that you might imagine it would be. So yeah, thanks again for making it possible for me to go to this event. I do feel like I learned a ton, and I did get some really good congressional content. Like I said, I met 5 members of Congress and had informational conversations with each of them. It was interesting how a couple of them, one in particular, she was just in politics mode. Like, she was answering my questions. She was very friendly, but I just didn't feel like I was getting what she actually felt. You know, it's like her eyes were not glassed over because she was present. She was answering my questions, but she just wasn't, I don't know. I felt like I was getting the show, you know, she was putting on a show for me, where another Representative Cloud, we had a real conversation. And Representative Davidson, that was a real conversation. Representative LaHood wouldn't talk to me until he vetted me, because he asked me, like, what's my political ideology? How long have I been doing my podcast? He was the only one who kind of asked me questions about, like, who am I, before he would speak to me, and even admitted what he was doing. He was like, yeah, I just want to kind of know who you are because I haven't heard of you before. And it was like, yeah, fair enough. I am nobody, apparently. And he did talk to me and we had a great conversation. You'll hear it after the DNC when I'm ready to air all of these conversations. But yeah, I got to meet 5 members of Congress. I got the business cards of their communication staff. So I do think this is going to be good for this show in the long run. And I couldn't have done it without you. So yeah, thanks for supporting the show and thanks for listening. And on my way back from this conference, there's going to be a hearing with the Secret Service about the assassination attempt. And I'm going to have to watch that one, because after being surrounded by these surprisingly young Secret Service agents for the last 4 days and being this close to the assassination attempts, like, I do have some pretty serious questions about how any of that was even possible. And so even if that episode is 20 minutes long, I want to give you the best pieces of testimony from that hearing, because I think we all have a lot of questions, and I'll cut out the fluff for you. And so it's not going to be long before you hear my voice again. We're looking at a 4-episode month of Congressional Dish. I don't think we've done that since like 2012. But yeah, I will have that out for you as soon as I can next week. Till then, thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.